Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so I watched this Theo Von interview of Jake Paul because they talk politics a little bit in it. Jake Paul all of a sudden seems like he wants to go into politics, and Trump gave him, for some reason, an endorsement at a random speech that they did together in Kentucky. And Jake Paul is one of these guys who, you know, is going to do it just for the sake of doing it, thinks he can do anything, and has had success in the boxing world. So, you know, basically takes that as an invite. So basically takes that, as well as the current atmosphere of like manosphere, masculinity equals good politics, as an invite that there's a path forward there for him. So they got into that a little bit here, and some of the conversation that they had, although I don't think Jake Paul really has much to say about any subject, and his version of being a Republican is actually, I think, the most boring and least appealing version. So I think his future in politics is dead on arrival purely for that reason. But I think the difference between him and Theo Von shows an interesting split that's emerging in the Trump base, which I'm always talking about, and how much that represents the average person, I don't know, because these are rich guys, but it's interesting to see it narratively take place to people who are on the different side of the spectrum in terms of how they look at this political stuff. So here is Theo Von and Jake Paul first talking about Jake Paul's potential future in politics.
Yeah, I've been like flirting with the idea of politics just because I think it goes back to Marcus Aurelius of like helping society, and like that's the number one thing you can do. If I'm the best person to do it and can actually win, then like I might need to do it. I'm already playing the biggest games of life.
Yeah.
So we'll dabble in that if it makes sense. And if there's like a Kamala running on the Democratic Party, like fucking dumbass running and opposing, I will enter the game and risk getting assassinated, but I don't want to. So it's become like a funny joke that I would, and then randomly Trump endorses me fully, which someone texted me that said like you'd have to pay him $1 billion to get that endorsement.
And you got it for free right there.
Yeah.
I mean, would it be something like you would run with Vance? I mean, do you think it's something like that? Or would you start as mayor of like northern Puerto Rico or something? Or is there any talks, or what is the concept, I guess? Sorry.
Yeah, so you actually are like super perceptive, because that was my plan, was to start in northern Puerto Rico. Yeah, and like Charlie would have been the guy.
Yeah.
So it's fucking sad, bro. He's fucking awesome.
You know what?
He was like aiming for it though. I think that's the problem. Is like, I'm just a fucking kid from Ohio that's a high school dropout. Like, if it makes sense at some point, then it makes sense. And that was like his job and his purpose and all of that.
Yeah.
And I loved that, but like if someone was like, this is like me becoming a world champion in boxing, like it makes more sense than Jake Paul becoming president. Charlie Kirk was clearly going to be the next president. So I think that's part of the whole thing that happened.
Right, the whole energy that's out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That somebody did, there was probably people that didn't want to see that possibly occur.
Yeah, so he says that this is a pretty thought out path that he has considered, being like a mayor, he says, potentially in North Puerto Rico, and then using that to leverage his way in politics, which would be a legitimate way to go about it. I don't know about the politics in North Puerto Rico. I'm assuming that if he thinks there's a lane open to run as a Republican there's probably a reason for that. So we'll see. I wouldn't write it off because this guy has enough success that he could float his way into that. The thing about that is he's early enough into his career. I don't know. I don't pay that close attention to him, but he's early enough in his career that he would have to leverage a lot of his wealth and his assets in order to like float himself for a large scale run. So starting at a lower level and then maybe seeing if there's a path forward for him would probably be the way that would take place, and he probably wouldn't want to do that because he has a more exciting life being a boxer and doing basically whatever he wants. So that's more likely for now, for a long time probably. But because Trump randomly decided to say, I think you have a future in politics, that must be because of some type of conversations they've had or something like that. He must be feeling like, okay, there's maybe a lane opening for me right now. And that lane would be specifically a pro-Trump lane. So that is an important thing, I think, to mention about the lane that he would be considering jumping into as a politician and what he specifically feels like there's room for him, because Trump has invited him in and he's clearly coming with this pro-Trump rhetoric. He's in favor of the war. He really hasn't broken with Trump on anything. And they talk for a brief second here about how like, oh yeah, you're right, Trump should have to send his kids to the war, because that's what Theo Von has been saying lately. But he's clearly not fully on board with that and is not a part of this camp of people that's kind of breaking with Trump on the issues of war and starting to look at him differently over the Epstein files and stuff like that. He's not in that camp, which is the reason why he was standing on stage with Trump and why Trump said something like that about him, because Trump rewards people who he gets signals from that like, oh, I'm backing you up, I'm behind you in this moment where people are breaking from you. So that's specifically his lane. And so the question for him would be, how much of a lane is there going to be for that going forward? Not a lot is what it seems like would be the case, but Trump has a lot of staying power as a political figure. It always seems to renew itself. And on the right, you see this emerging strand that is opportunistically realizing that the Trump movement has kind of overstayed its welcome. The perception of Trump is fading, especially among young people. And so regardless, even if Trump is still around for the rest of his presidency and does a lot of this or that, he basically is done when it comes to the next generation of politics. And in as far as there's an election in 2028, it's going to be some new generation of Republicans that's running. When you see Tucker Carlson crafting a new form of rhetoric around Israel, around even socialism and tying that to Christianity, bizarrely, he's trying to craft a rhetoric that is going to essentially be the future of Republicans and conservative politics. And that is a lot more interesting than what Jake Paul is doing here, obviously, because they are actually thinking about like, this is what somebody's going to need to offer in order to carry Republican or conservative politics. Whereas Jake strikes me as somebody who's kind of riding this wave of popularity of that at the moment, and the fact that it was popular in 2024 to endorse Trump and be, hey, Trump's cool, he lets us be all rich. And now that that's pretty much over, he doesn't really seem to realize that he needs to figure out somewhere else to go. So like I said, I think that's the end of his political career there. And if he doesn't figure out something more savvy than that, then we probably won't have to deal with him as a political contender. But here's an interesting part where they get into Charlie Kirk a little bit. And again, you can see the split here, because Theo Von is like Kirk-brained about conspiracies. It was this or that. It was an explosive device. There was a factory that exploded, blah, 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 blah. So he brings it up like that. And Jake Paul discerningly says, well, I think most of that shit is bullshit, but also says that he thinks Charlie Kirk was like likely to have been the next president. So that shows you the kind of like mainstream Republican type of brain that he has when he's thinking about politics. So here's that. In the first clip, this was earlier in the interview when Theo Von brought up Charlie Kirk, and then later they get back to it in the next part.
Okay, do you think Erica Kirk had anything to do with the husband's death? Let's switch it up. And that's mouthwash, but yeah, keep having some. Do you
I love Listerine, bro.
It's a fucking good stuff. That's a new Listerine green apple.
Bro,
you're funny, dude.
I don't know if you can ask that.
You're pretty
question.
funny. Okay.
I don't know. I'll talk about a lot of things, but I don't think I'll talk about Charlie Kirk and his assassination.
Okay.
And the sensitive details around it.
Oh, dude, I don't even want to fucking talk about it. It's just on our list of stuff. There's a lot of investigatorial stuff about that. You know, some people say that it was like a microphone on his lapel that blew up and that's what killed him. And then that microphone was made here in Tennessee. And then 2 weeks after that, the factory was made at blew to smithereens. And like 16 people died, which is just a kind of a crazy, like, that's one of the wildest kind of like, that's one of the most interesting theories that I've heard.
Yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there these days, and I was just with some like bros in Minnesota, and they were kind of asking me about these conspiracy theories because they were like, "Oh, he knows more than I do." I think that a lot of it is fucking bullshit, but why, as a society, like, do we hang on to these so much? Like
Conspiracy theories?
Yeah, because it's like,
Well,
bro, we love drama as humans, basically.
We do.
We just love fucking bad news, and we love to like
we have become
gossip.
yes.
This is the
Gossip
fucking problem.
yeah, it is a problem.
And so conspiracy theories give people a reason to fucking gossip, and like it's just like something to do, bro. People are bored.
Well,
like
also-
I've never met a rich person who's doing dope shit in life that gives a fuck about any of this shit, because they just have better shit to do. That's the problem. Is like people need to go get a job and have a purpose, and this is the problem. Is all of it has become an entertainment product.
It's all the WWE. I've been saying this for years. Everything is the WWE.
So this person who's claiming to tell the truth starts to dabble in like a little bit of like fun because it's gonna get more views. I mean, it goes back to a lot of these people.
But you understand that? I mean, you guys have done.
This is why I understand it.
Got it. I see what you're
It's
saying.
because I do this, but the difference is I'm not doing it on things that like affect the world, and I'm not talking about missiles and Iran and fucking Israel and Charlie Kirk. I'm like talking shit to Conor McGregor.
Yeah, so
Right.
two interesting things here is Jake Paul's sheepishness about getting into the conspiracy angle of the Charlie Kirk stuff, and also his reverence for Charlie Kirk. So to me, that places him pretty cleanly on the spectrum. And I didn't know this before watching this, but he is apparently a supporter of Israel and a Zionist. So that probably colors his perspective a little bit on this, and is why he wants to stay away from the conspiracy angle, which, to be clear, I don't think is really true. I don't necessarily think that there was any foul play in Charlie Kirk being shot. Could have been, but there's no real evidence for it. But I think the narrative is good. I think it's good for the narrative to be there, because specifically it splits the base and made it so that the psycho-conservative angle at the time of Charlie Kirk being killed didn't coalesce around like, let's eradicate trans people. So Candace Owens successfully threw water on that fire by diverting some people's attention to this conspiracy theory stuff, which is genuinely more connected to Israel, which is operative in a lot of American politics in a way that the culture war stuff that a lot of the mainstream Republicans and that a person like Jake Paul would no doubt be focused on if he was running for office is not as connected to the actual nuts and bolts of how politics works in America. We're talking about the relationship between America and Israel and the Middle East, and why we're kind of constantly going to war in accordance with them or relying on them for intelligence, etc., and getting dragged into stuff like this. That's a conversation that Republicans have been forced to have. And it's funny to see Jake Paul go on this rant about how like people who are into conspiracies just need to like get a job and stuff like that, when Theo is the one who brought this up. And he does it a couple times. He brings it up throughout the interview. He does clearly want to talk about this. And truly what I'm curious about is, you know, come an election cycle in 2028, how much of an appetite would there be for, let's say, like Gen Z Republican like Jake Paul runs, but not incorporating this more populist and even anti-Israel angle? how much appeal for that will there be? Would a guy like Jake Paul be able to be a meaningful force without taking some kind of populist tactic, or at least being the guy who comes out and says, I'm not going to take money from Israel and I'm not going to blah, blah, blah? Because that's what Tucker's going to be willing to do. That's what these other young guys who are thinking about running are going to be willing to do, is differentiate themselves from what's viewed as the establishment in that way. And especially when you're running on the right, you're going to have to appease people who are more anti-Semitic with it. And so that's just going to be something that, as long as Israel remains central to the conversation throughout that time, it's going to be one of the main things that shapes like how viable a candidate is. So I just think it's interesting to see this kind of like dumb guy, himbo, Republican type of thing, because I feel like this is dying off. The like, I'm just a Republican because it's cool. And, you know, he talks about doing ayahuasca in this interview and how like metal is an organism, and he talks to all the objects in his house, and, you know, he's went to Peru and did these ayahuasca treatments and stuff like that. And it just is shocking to me, the vapidness, and also this trend of ayahuasca like Republicans and tech bros and stuff like that, who feel very enlightened in their very selfish, closed off, conservative mindset. And so I think there is some room for some spacey, heady, conservative, libertarian type of rhetoric on the right going forward, because more and more people do seem to be gravitating to that. But it's going to have to, I just don't see how you don't incorporate any type of like populist politics or anti-war politics or anything like that, even under the influence of like psychedelic drugs that are meant to induce that kind of sympathy. I don't know. It's bleak, man. And I look at that sort of thing and it's antithetical to what I feel like countercultural type of stuff is supposed to be. But at the same time, that has become the mainstream. Like, I think among a lot of younger people, if not Jake Paul, people like him are more interesting, and people who dip into this manosphere stuff and the weird looks maxing and stuff like that. That's what is viewed as like relevant in a sense, not amongst everybody, but in terms of the cultural trends. And so I do think there's going to continue to be room for a guy like Jake Paul to ride that. I'm just not sure, especially if our politics continues to be shaped by wars and use of the military. If we just go back to normal after all this stuff that Trump pulled in Iran, he's going to try this again in Cuba. He's going to try this again in other Latin American countries, possibly Greenland as well. You know, this just kind of fizzling out on the war front is not a good thing, in my opinion, when it comes to what Trump is going to do next, because they should not be able to walk away from this stuff claiming victory. Even if the situation is objectively worse than it was when we walked in, they're still going to claim victory, and they're still going to use the full might of the military against a place like Cuba and anyone else that they feel like, Colombia maybe. So whoever's going to come into power next is going to have to like be willing to fix that. There's going to be a lot of damage done. And I don't think somebody like Jake Paul is a threat. And I think somebody like Tucker Carlson is more of a threat, because he's recognizing that like this austerity politics isn't going to work anymore. And somebody who's talking about investing in solving problems is, even if they couch it in a more conservative, friendly language, that's what's going to be the winning message, especially after Trump leaves a lot of shit in wreckage. So the typical Republican brains and somebody like Charlie Kirk, I don't think would be capable of running that type of message. And I think the reason a guy like Tucker Carlson is taking up that space is because he's willing to say things that are frustrating for the average conservative to hear, like, you know, socialism is a core part of Christianity or whatever he's talking about. He's clearly trying to build a rhetoric that is suitable in a political climate that's going to be increasingly demanding socialist solutions. So that is the most dangerous thread of conservatism. And, you know, a charismatic and guy with a following like Jake Paul would be a threat only in as far as he would adopt a message like that. When it comes to Kanye, I'm not seeing any reason to think that his beliefs have shifted even a tiny inch, but it's possible that he's back on this medication that's making him feel like it's less worth it to be the one dedicating his life to Hitler and going and Sieg Heilen and Nazi insignias and all the shit that he was doing.